Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And of course, we're hanging on every word that the chairman had to say about what is happening with the naming of managers for the Senate trial. And does Nancy Pelosi have a way of negotiating with Mitch McConnell to get a fair trial?
The issue of McConnell's strategic thinking on this is a little bit of a black box. Lots of leaks, lots of competing arguments between the White House and McConnell's camp, supposedly. We do know that McConnell is going to speak tomorrow about what he's calling an unprecedented impeachment, which I think is him trying to unlock the door that says he should follow previous precedent for the way the Senate trial was conducted for President Clinton. But this is, Nancy Pelosi is good at this game, as is Mitch McConnell. She does hold some cards here. Nobody's ever tried to leverage the conveying of articles of impeachment between two houses. We saw history and drama tonight, but now there is a whole new drama that is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and we saw it at that brief news conference that Speaker Pelosi had with Chairman Schiff and other chairmen, where she was asked very clearly about, are you sending the articles over? And she would not commit to even sending the articles over. And that fits with what Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe had, the case he has been making. He made it in a Washington Post op-ed piece. We know that he has conferred with House Judiciary Committee members and other House members about this possibility of holding the articles in the House until Mitch McConnell agrees to a form of trial that the House thinks is fair. And so we're in the middle of that drama right now. That drama is underway.
That's underway as of right now. And you think about the president right now. The president is, as a man, he has never had very many accountability moments in his life. He's never really gotten in trouble for very many things. He's gotten into scrapes, but he's always gotten his way out of them. Declaring bankruptcy is not exactly getting in trouble. But he's in trouble, and this is a place that he's sort of never been. We don't exactly know how he's going to react. But the way it stands right now, he has been impeached as only the third U.S. president to have that ever happen to. He has not mounted a defense, and he has articulated a desire to mount a robust defense in the Senate. That cannot happen. That cannot start until the Senate trial starts, and the Senate trial can't start without the articles. So if the president really wants to mount this defense because he really can't stand twisting in the wind as an impeached, undefended president, then, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump may be pulling in the same direction here.
Yeah, and inside the House, Congressman Earl Blumenauer has been the one who's been pushing this idea about hold the articles until McConnell agrees with what is basically now the Schumer request about how to conduct the trial. Congressman Blumenauer actually said this on the House floor today when he was making his speech in favor of the articles of impeachment. He's going to join us in this hour and tell us exactly what he can tell us at this stage about the momentum for this idea. Something's happening, Rachel, because Nancy Pelosi could have very simply answered, of course, the articles are prepared. We will be delivering them tomorrow. It is absolutely routine when the House of Representatives passes something that it virtually immediately gets delivered to the House. There have been instances in which it's physically been run over to the Senate after it passes the House, and sometimes the other way from the Senate to the House. For her to just leave that hanging, not answer the question about when do the articles get to the Senate tonight, means that this drama is absolutely on. The Earl Blumenauer idea has life. Something's happening with it tonight. We're going to find out what he can tell us about it, we'll know more tomorrow.
And just moments ago, more fuel for that thesis of yours, which is me asking Congressman Schiff what's going on with that, and him saying, I'm not going to speak to the speaker's timing, and I'm not going to talk about what happens next with the Senate trial. We are focused on what happened tonight. He's the one who's raised the most pointed questions in leadership and from the podium tonight, standing next to Nancy Pelosi about what the Senate's going to do. And for him to refuse to engage on that at all, leaving those questions more pointed than ever, I think you are onto something. I think what you're talking about is what's going on.
And there was another big clue today with Steny Hoyer actually telling reporters, telling Politico, yeah, that's something we've been discussing. And Steny Hoyer is the dead center of the establishment leadership thinking in the House. For him to admit that it was under discussion was surprising to me. 24 hours ago, Rachel, I would have said to you, oh, impossible. It can't be done. It won't happen. And we're watching it happen.
We're watching it happen.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen overnight, and it's going to happen tomorrow morning. It's going to happen over the course of the day. There was unexpected drama today for what seemed like it should have just been a foregone conclusion. There's a lot of drama today, but it continues now.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.